My dad always told me stories about my Uncle Thomas. He was 2 years younger than him, but they always got along greatly. After school, they would head to the library, going on about their day with each other. Back and forth, they go on about crushes, homework, and what they were gonna do tomorrow. They sit in the library and each find a book to flip through. He said both of them loved to read because that was their escape. You see, my grandparents weren't the best of people. They were quite neglectful of my dad and brother. How else do you think they could go to the library after school without asking any sort of permission? He always felt the need to protect Thomas. They were the best of friends. Well, until Thomas entered high school, that is. He stopped hanging around my dad and fell into a rough crowd. Dad tried to reach out to him, but Thomas showed no desire to be around him anymore. Extremely hurt, my dad started to shut down and became severely depressed. The person he had practically raised and protected wanted nothing to do with him anymore. He pretty much stayed like that until he met my mother in college. She showed him the light in his life and that he didn't need his brother's acceptance to realize what a great person he was. My dad said once Thomas graduated, we left town and never saw him again. He dropped this ball on me after years of stories at the library, going through the park and late night talks that lasted for hours. I was hurt for my father and angry at a man I never met. At least yet. Everything was about to change for the better about a month after my 7th birthday. Dad was telling me that Uncle Thomas had recently gotten in touch with him and they've been talking on the phone. He seemed so excited and apparently Thomas had apologized for the past. He claimed to regret throwing away their relationship and begged for a fresh start. My dad was open to it, but I could tell my mom wasn't so sure. I found out later that she had also talked personally with Thomas, letting him know of the damage he'd done and how long it took to fix it. After everyone seemed pleased, a date was set for Thomas to visit. That date became a day that will be burned into my memory until I take my last breath. I was in the backyard playing with various toys I had at the time. Some plastic trucks mixed in the few action figures I had. I'm sure I could make quite the little adventure with that. As I played, I heard the back door open behind me. I disregarded it as my dad coming out to check up on me. I continued fumbling around with my toys as I heard the sound of footsteps descend the steps onto the yard. They stopped just a few feet behind me. After a few moments of silence, I slowly turned to see who was watching me. Standing behind me was a tall, slender man with dark hair and green eyes similar to my dad's. He was wearing black boots covered by khakis, and tucked into them was a plain black polo. A watch was worn on his left hand. He was looking at me curiously, but showed a slight smile when our eyes met. "Hello, Grayson," he said to me. His voice was warm and calm. He came around in front of me and stooped to my level. "My name is Thomas. It is so nice to finally meet you." He extended his hand to shake. I slowly reached out and accepted his offer. I liked him right there. He seemed nice, welcoming even. I smiled at him and he laughed a bit. "I've heard a lot about you," I told him. "I'm happy to meet you, Uncle Thomas." When I said that, his smile wavered just a bit, but then returned. He looked down at his watch and then back at me. "So, what are you doing out here?" I can't remember exactly what I said to him, but I basically gave him a rundown of the situation I was playing out with my many toys. He nodded occasionally and listened along. Once I finished, he glanced at his watch again. "Do you usually play alone out here?" he asked me. I laughed. "Yeah, I'm big enough to play out here alone. Mom and Dad check up on me very often, and now and then." I expected him to reply, but he did not. I looked up at him, and he was staring back with a stern look on his face. It occurred to me that his eyes were now a light gray color. Weren't his eyes just green? I thought to myself. "That's not right of them, Grayson. Being alone out here, at your age, is very dangerous." I stammered for a bit, trying to come up with something to lighten the mood, but he only kept staring at me with the same stern look. He glanced back down at his watch once more, and a toothy grin showed on his face. "Say, Grayson, do you want to see something really cool?" Relieved that he seemed to no longer be upset with me, I said, "Yeah, show me something cool, Uncle Thomas." He smiled a very devious smile that immediately made me feel uneasy. He leaned forward. "Look into my eyes, Grayson." I reluctantly did so, and all things of our world ceased to exist. Flashes of various scenes showed before me. I saw awful, hideous things. I tried closing my eyes, but I still saw them as if the back of my eyelids were a TV screen. I saw an infant baby with his eyes rolled back in his head being held by a weeping mother. It looked as if she was moving down to kiss him, but her jaw unhinged, and she bit down hard on his head. Blood and brain matter spurted out of her mouth. I saw another dimension that seemed to be something taken out of hell. Thousands of small creatures crawling on all four across a ruin of fire and brimstone. There was a towering monster that seemed to be looking over them. It was black and horned with red patches all over its skin. It looked right at me, and it actually noticed me. It raised a claw and waved while smiling ear to ear. I saw a being that appeared to be half human and half spider ripping a woman in half. It walked forward while doing so, and the way it did could not have any sense made out of it. Its legs appeared to go through its body, and it shuddered violently. When its legs did so, the sound it made was children crying. As quick as I was dragged into whatever this was, I was yanked out of it and felt as if I was punched in the stomach. For a second, Uncle Thomas did not look human. He looked sort of like a werewolf, except his ears were long and pointed like an elf. They were not covered in fur like the rest of his face, and he appeared to have an open, horizontal mouth on his neck, lined with razor-sharp teeth. The fear that ran through me was so great I couldn't even scream. I blinked, and suddenly, Thomas was back to the way he was. I breathed quickly while looking at him, and he looked back at me smirking. His eyes were black now. He seemed forward again until his nose was almost touching mine. He then spoke in a voice that was in no way human. "September 15th, 2017, he growled. He leaned back and casually stood up as if nothing happened. At this point, I was paralyzed with fear and continued watching him, unable to do anything. Without looking, he reached over to his left wrist and took off his watch. After placing it in his pocket, he turned and started back towards the house. He walked up the stairs and approached the back door. I was scared he'd look at me again and throw me back into torment, but he did not. After a slight pause, he opened the door and went into the house. On September 15th, 2017, my mother was killed in a car accident. A semi-truck driver fell asleep at the wheel and completely destroyed her. Her legs were found on the left side of the road, and top half of her body was further down on the right. Her head, however, was never found. So, reader, I'm sure you're full of questions. What does this all mean? If my uncle could apparently predict the future, could I do so as well? Are there beings in my family that are not actually human? Well, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I'm just a regular guy, along with the rest of what's left of my family, because after Uncle Thomas went inside, I did so as well, about 15 minutes later. Before I did, I just sat there recounting what I saw. I couldn't cry or anything for some reason. It was as if I hadn't seen things no other human was meant to, and my body didn't know how to react. When I was inside, I immediately went into the living room where the TV was on. I could hear Dad at the front door talking to someone I knew was Thomas. After a few minutes of talking, he called my name. I suppressed a groan and slowly walked over to them. The last thing I want to do was see my uncle again. I was so scared I was shaking. When I got to them, a heavy-set man I had never seen before stepped into the house. A gasp escaped me when I saw how much he looked like my father. He gave me a welcoming smile, and my dad patted him on the back. "Grayson," he said, beaming. "I'd like you to meet your Uncle Thomas.